This is an introduction to week 3 on varieties of democracy. Two sets of readings this week, so not too heavy. We're going to start looking at Frederick Wieland's Democracy Theory and Practice. That's chapter 13, so we're starting not at the beginning of the book, but actually towards the end, and Arndt Leipart's Patterns of Democracy, the first 3 chapters. This week, most of the work being done is typological. That is to say, we're trying to classify democracies into different types, primarily because we have the suspicion that different mixes of institutions might tend to produce different sorts of outcomes. And because we're interested in those outcomes, we want to know what kinds of institutions produce them. Democracies vary, we will see, based on the type of electoral system they have in place, how their executive branch and legislative branches interact, and what role regional or local governments play in the national government. These different types also emerge because of different ideas about what democracy is. Is democracy about rule by a majority? Is it about representing all societal interests fairly? Or is it about accountability of the government to the people? Let's talk about the Wieland chapter first. Wieland introduces presidentialism, parliamentarism, and semi-presidentialism, which divides democracy based on the relationship between their executive branches and their legislative branches. He also introduces the federal unitary dimensions. Federal countries have multiple subnational publics with their own independent authority, so you might look at American states as being the archetype of this. American states have their own elections, collect their own taxes, and so on and so forth, and for that reason they command the allegiance of their local publics and have authority over them in specific defined issues that are defined in the U.S. Constitution. In unitary countries, by contrast, all political authority flows from the national government. So that doesn't mean there are no state and local governments in unitary countries. It just means that these local governments get their authority from the central government. That is to say, they don't have a separate source of legitimacy. The second set of readings I wanted you to look at this week is really from a classic in political science, a very famous book called Patterns of Democracy, and this is an updated version. I think the original came out in the mid-1980s, but this is a newer edition with new data and updated. Patterns of Democracy introduces the idea of consensus democracy and majoritarian or Westminster democracy. Leipart finds that democracies tend to cluster around these two archetypes, each of which embodies its own theory of democracy and specific combinations of institutions. So what's going on is that in his book is trying to show that you can't just combine any institution with any institution. You can't just, you don't tend to see rigid constitutions and one-party legislatures or two-party systems for that matter. Those aren't combinations that tend to go together. Of course, the irony is that the United States is the ultimate exception in Leipart's book. He doesn't talk about the U.S. much because the U.S. seems to be an outlier, whereas other democracies seem to fall more neatly into one category or another. All right, so that's our introduction for week 3. Happy reading, and please do look at the other materials this week as well.